The battle between Taylor Swift, Braun and Scott Borchetta over Taylor's master recordings is one of the biggest pop culture stories of the last 10 years, and also one of the most misunderstood. It's an incredibly complex legal and moral debate involving 10+ years of ongoing rivalries and dramas weaving together to create an explosive showdown in 2019. I constantly see so many people not understanding what the Taylor's version project is about, why she's doing it, and who's in the right, so I wanted to make this video to break down the entire drama and everything you need to know. I've tried to be as impartial as possible, telling you all the relevant detail in a timeline, rather than telling you my personal opinions, and you can come to your own conclusion. Hopefully this video will clarify the situation. So please like and subscribe to support the channel if you enjoy. I'm going to discuss the whole situation in 5 chapters, explaining what Taylor's contract was, how the internal division between Taylor Swift, Scott Borchetta, and Braun happened, and explain everything you need to know about this entire situation. I want to note that HBO recently did a 2-part documentary on this situation, one part revolving around Taylor's version of events, the other being Scooter's. And this is what drove me to want to make this video, because I actually think it's a very poorly done documentary. Not only do they not tell us any new information, but they leave out key details. The balance is all over the place, with them spending long periods discussing details like the 2009 VMAs and Scooter's relationship with Justin Bieber, which aren't particularly relevant, and then skimming past very crucial parts of the story. They interview extremely biased individuals, from hardcore Taylor fans to journalists like Rachel Brodsky, who've written in an extremely vitriolic way about Taylor in the past. Most importantly, I think the documentary is quite misleading, leading to ill-informed overreactions. In an attempt to seem like they aren't biased towards Taylor, they go as far as bringing up Scooter's family being Holocaust survivors, and that he supported Ariana after the Manchester concert attack, and try to use these points to undermine the narrative that Taylor is the one in a tough situation, which to me was extremely emotionally manipulative. I don't think it does a good enough job at explaining the situation and everything you need to know about it, so I'll do it myself. This whole saga seems super overwhelming and something that would really be a struggle to deal with. And if you're feeling like you're struggling with anything at all, you're not alone. Today's paid partner BetterHelp can connect you with a credentialed therapist, entirely online, and they can help you with anything, from relationship difficulties, stress over school or work, grief, lack of confidence, or anything else you might be dealing with. Using a personalized survey, BetterHelp can match you with a therapist who you feel most comfortable with. They take into account your preferences for the type of therapist you want to speak to, whether that's someone of a certain race, age, religious belief, or more. BetterHelp also takes into account who you are, asking you about the things that matter to you, what you're hoping to get out of therapy, and whether you've seen a therapist before. All to cater your experience so you get the best help possible. Once you sign up and connect with a therapist, you'll be able to communicate with them either through messaging, phone calls, or video call sessions. They can even cater to the type of therapy you need, focusing on the issues you care about, and helping you proactively work through your goals in whatever way you need. Whether that's joining support groups, completing a therapy journal, or just having someone to talk to. Whatever you're struggling with, you don't need to go through it alone. Join the millions of people using BetterHelp. Click my link betterhelp.com/lcbo in the description and join BetterHelp today. Scott Borchetta grew up in California as the son of Mike Borchetta, who worked in the music industry under labels like Capitol, Mercury, and RCA Records. When Scott grew up, he also started working in the music industry, focusing on country music, and eventually became an executive at the label MCA, a division of UMG, but was fired in 1997. His job had involved choosing singles, and he had a reputation for being overbearing and controlling. With Clarence Spalding, a Nashville manager who managed acts like the Rascal Flatts, saying, "There are days when I would like to choke Scott Borchetta." Soon after, he got another job in the Nashville division of DreamWorks Records, but in 2003 it was acquired by UMG, the company who had fired Scott 6 years earlier. He continued working there but was apparently unhappy and believed he could do better on his own. In November 2004, Scott meets a 14-year-old Taylor Swift when she performs at the Bluebird Cafe in Nashville. Scott was impressed by Taylor's ability at such a young age, and saw a gap in the market for a teenage female country star, since the country scene at the time was dominated by middle-aged men. Scott approached Taylor and her parents and said that he planned to start his own label at some point and would recruit Taylor once he did. However, at this stage, Scott was still working for UMG and had no capital, no staff, no offices, no ability to start a record label of his own. In 2005, at the age of 15, Taylor signs a deal with RCA Records, owned by Sony, becoming Sony's youngest ever artist at the time. But this deal wasn't meant to be, and Taylor left her contract soon afterwards, unhappy with the development-style deal, where artists are commissioned by labels to make music in the studio without any commitment from the label that they will actually release it. Taylor later told interviewers that she wanted a label that was passionate about her and could offer her commitment, and she didn't want to risk being shelved by a larger record label like RCA. By the time Taylor left, Scott was doing exactly as he promised, and was starting his own label, having left his job at UMG. He officially opened the label in September 2005, naming it Big Machine Records and basing its headquarters in Music Row in Nashville. Big Machine fittingly had 13 employees. Scott immediately signed Taylor with a 13-year recording contract. The terms of the contract outlined that Taylor would have to produce 6 albums during those 13 years at Big Machine. Taylor was given a cash advance. I don't think the amount is public. If it is, I wasn't able to find it. In exchange for the cash advance, Big Machine retained the rights to Taylor's master recordings, while she maintained the rights to the music composition. Obviously, this is crucial to the drama that happened later, so let me explain this. What this contract means is that the music composition, the melodies, the lyrics, the structure of the songs themselves is owned by Taylor, but the actual recordings of those songs was owned by Big Machine. Taylor would receive royalties from her songs, which Forbes estimated to be around 10 to 15%, but Scott Borchetta owned and controlled them. Early in Big Machine's lifetime, Scott managed to raise capital from a variety of sources because of his experience. Importantly, Big Machine also received investment of $500,000 from Scott Swift, Taylor's father, in exchange for a 3% share of the company, which was apparently less of a profit-motivated decision, and more so that Taylor's dad would have some level of control over the company as a shareholder. From September until the end of the year, Taylor focused on her album. But Taylor's former manager, Dan Dimtro, reported that Taylor's dad was inquiring about who owned Taylor's masters around this time in 2005. And if Dan is telling the truth, this might indicate some naivety in Taylor's family. In October 2006, Taylor's first album releases, reaching number 5 on the Billboard 200. There's a long-running rumor that Taylor's dad bought 100,000 copies of this album to boost it in the charts, but there's literally zero evidence, and from my research, it seems to have started as a random comment in a Reddit thread that people just repeated. It doesn't even make sense considering Taylor's first album was a slow burner and only sold around 40,000 units in its first week, though it went on to be more successful. Scott Borchetta said that as a result of Taylor's album, Big Machine was never in debt, and the label never had a year where it lost money. It was able to sign more artists and spend money on what they wanted, thanks to the revenue and security Taylor's album brought. From the beginning, Big Machine was always kept afloat by Taylor Swift. In the song Happiness, Taylor describes her relationship with Scott Borchetta as 7 years in heaven. There's been dispute over how literal this line is, with some thinking the number 7 is just there for rhyming purposes and to be a reference to the game 7 Minutes in Heaven. But others think it's more literal, and that she was only in heaven for the first 7 years of her 13-year contract, which would make the turning point late 2012. And I personally find this argument pretty believable. So let's look at the first 7 years. Although Big Machine would go on to sign some existing popular country acts, Taylor Swift was the only major act Scott Borchetta ever discovered, and it's estimated that in the early few years, Taylor carried the label and provided around 80% of Big Machine's income. After the success of her first album, Taylor was catapulted to global fame with 2008's Fearless, which spent 11 weeks at number 1 and was the best-selling album of 2009. Fearless also gave Taylor critical acclaim and respect within the music industry, with Taylor becoming the youngest ever winner of Album of the Year at the Grammys for Fearless. This trajectory of success continued with 2010's Speak Now, but the turning point does seem to be Taylor's 4th album, Red. This was really Taylor's coming-of-age album. She described it as a mosaic album, with no cohesive sound, instead exploring a range of styles from indie rock to country to bubblegum pop. It was her transition from country to pop. It was her transition from child to adult. And it also seemed to be a transition in her relationship with Scott Borchetta. Red features 3 pure pop singles, and for the first time in Taylor's career, we get different narratives from her and from Scott. In a Grammy listening session in 2015, Taylor said that she was only allowed to make 3 pure pop songs on Red, and heavily implied that she wanted to move more towards pop, but was stopped by her label. Describing the writing process of Red, she said,
I was getting the ideas exactly the same way I always did, and then few months in, they started coming to me as pop melodies, and I could not fight it, and I just embraced it. I just wanted to see what it was like to work with Max Martin. I called him, and he came over to my house, and I said, I love what you do. I want to combine it with what I do, and I'm a little scared, but I'm not really that scared because I think it could be great. I'm not gonna second guess this. This is just a gut feeling. I think it's gonna work. We went in, we did 3 songs, 2 of which were I Knew You Were Trouble and We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together. And that was as much as I was kind of allowed to work with Max on that project.
In the same interview, she discusses the decision to make 1989 and says,
and so I went to bed and I woke up at 4 in the morning. I'm like, it's called 1989. I've been making 80s synth pop. I'm just going to do that. I'm calling it a pop record. I am not listening to anyone at my record label. I'm starting tomorrow.
Scott Borchetta, on the other hand, gave interviews saying that not only did he encourage Taylor to move towards pop, but that it was his idea, not Taylor's. He said when Taylor made her first draft of Red, it sounded like a country album, and that he told her, brilliant, great melody. But the way it was recorded, the production just doesn't match the song. It needs a pop sound. Obviously, we don't know what the truth here is, but it does seem odd that Scott would be the one to encourage Taylor to move towards pop when he ran a country music label, and his vision for Taylor revolved around her being a young woman in country. Taylor also said in an interview that after she submitted the final draft of Red, Scott asked her to add a pure country song, but she said no. There's also speculation around there being even more division between Scott and Taylor over this album as a result of the Red Vault. Revealing songs like Nothing New and Forever Winter, which have more mature themes and may have possibly been left off the original album since Taylor's brand was entirely family-friendly and uncontroversial at the time. The Red Vault also features the 10-minute version of All Too Well that she says she wasn't allowed to release back in 2012. In my opinion, the end of 2012, when Red released, is when the 7 years in heaven ended. Red was another smash success, spawning hit singles and millions of sales, but it seemed to cause a rift in the relationship between Scott Borchetta and Taylor Swift. Taylor still had 2 albums to release with Big Machine, a country music label, but now seemed set on moving towards pop. In terms of her style and her behavior, she seemed to take on the image of a pop star, changing her fashion from a cottagecore aesthetic to the look we're more used to seeing her in. She appeared almost every day wearing high heels, a miniskirt, and a designer handbag. And after the night at 4 a.m. where she decided to make 1989, she fully moved into the pop world. Within weeks, she cut her hair into her trademark bob and moved to New York. In October 2014, Taylor released 1989, an entirely pop album and Taylor's complete departure from country music, though she was still signed to a country label. Not only was there apparently division between her and Scott over the sound of the album, but the entire 1989 era seemed to be Taylor trying to distance herself from Big Machine. Aside from physically moving to New York, away from Big Machine's headquarters in Nashville, there's also a change in Taylor's attitude. In 1989 era interviews, she seems much more confident and comfortable taking credit for her own achievements, rather than immediately giving credit to Scott and thanking him for his contribution like she used to. There's an interview on YouTube with Big Machine's chief operating officer where he attributes most of the 1989 era to Taylor, even saying that they were able to move marketing resources to other artists at the label because Taylor almost completely took control of marketing, branding, and music videos for this album. And in the most fitting way imaginable, the era concluded in early 2016, when Taylor won Album of the Year for a second time, for an album her label didn't want her to do, and seemed to fantasize about hitting Scott in the head with it. Taylor later said that during her 13-year contract, she repeatedly asked Scott to buy her masters. She never clarified exactly when she began inquiring about this, but because of Taylor's increased independence during the 1989 era, I think she was definitely asking for them by this point, if not much earlier. So Taylor and Scott seemed to have division over her pop direction and over her masters. Things got really bad for Taylor in 2016. I won't go into too much detail because this warrants a whole video, but all you need to know is that in April 2016, Scooter Braun was hired as Kanye West's manager. Then in July, Kanye releases the music video for Famous with the infamous lyric,
I feel like me and Taylor might still have sex. Why? I made that bitch famous.
The music video features a naked wax figure replica of Taylor, as well as other celebrities, and in more recent years has been referred to as a total violation of consent and comparable to revenge porn. Taylor publicly condemned the video and lyric and said she wasn't okay with it. Later that month, Kim Kardashian released an edited recorded phone call, making it look like Taylor had consented to the lyric and branded her a snake. Kim's narrative here is completely misleading, but I'm planning on making a video about that whenever Taylor announces Reputation TV. At the time, Taylor began getting widely attacked, and it seemed like her career was in trouble with the wave of hate against her, even from other celebrities. Justin Bieber posted a FaceTime screenshot of himself with Scooter and Ye with the caption Taylor Swift, "What's up?" Taylor later referred to this as Scooter Braun participating in bullying her at her lowest point. And as far as we know, this is the reason why Taylor didn't like Scooter Braun to begin with. After all this drama, Taylor releases her sixth and final album with Big Machine, Reputation, in 2017, which fulfilled her contractual obligation, although her deal didn't actually run out until November 2018. During the period in between, a year of fierce negotiations broke out with Scott Borchetta trying to convince Taylor to sign with Big Machine again. Taylor said that after her Big Machine contract expired in 2018, she continued asking Scott to buy her masters, but remained unsuccessful. Aside from that being a crucial part of the negotiations over whether or not Taylor would re-sign with Big Machine, you can see some of the other asks here. What Taylor wanted is on the left, and what Scott wanted is on the right. Taylor was considering signing with Big Machine for another 7 years, but Big Machine wanted 10. The other seeming disagreement is Taylor asking for control over licensing of her music, marketing, distribution, and so on. Big Machine says that they agree to Taylor having more control in principle, but the limits are still to be discussed. They also forbid her from ever re-recording any of her existing work if she re-signs with Big Machine. Obviously, this chart is just one of the leaked aspects of their negotiations, and it went on for much longer and was much more complicated, involving disagreements over a ton of details, particularly Taylor's masters. We don't have evidence for who's telling the truth here, but the negotiations are another area where we get different stories from Taylor and Scott. Taylor claimed that there was only one way for her to regain ownership of her masters, and that was to re-sign with Big Machine and produce more music. She claims a contract offered by Big Machine stated that she would essentially earn her albums back one by one. If she produced a new album, she could own the masters of one of the existing 6 Big Machine albums. Eventually, after producing 6 more albums, Scott would own the new ones, and Taylor would own the original 6 in exchange. If Taylor produced the same albums she went on to make, this would mean that Taylor would currently own Debut, Fearless, Speak Now, Red, and 1989, and Scott would own Lover, Folklore, Evermore, Midnights, and Tortured Poets, and that Taylor would gain the ability to own Reputation when she makes her next album, which would be owned by Scott. And obviously, this is a terrible deal for Taylor. The whole point was her wanting to own all of her work, so this doesn't solve the problem and would only lead to a fight for Taylor trying to own the next 6 albums. Aside from the moral argument that artists deserve to own the masters for the work they created, the career implications of this deal are quite strong. The only way that this deal financially makes sense for Taylor is if she assumed that her success had already peaked, and that albums 7 through 12 would be less successful than 1 through 6. The deal basically came down to whether Taylor believed in herself. If she thought her biggest successes were behind her, it might have made sense to re-sign to Big Machine. If she thought her biggest successes were still to come, then she had no choice but to leave. Importantly, Scott's story does contradict this. He says that he wanted Taylor to re-sign for 10 years, and that she would immediately gain ownership of her old work as soon as she signed again. He says that she wouldn't necessarily have to make 6 albums in those 10 years. I'll get into this more later because this conflict ended up playing out publicly, but I don't actually think it matters that much. Both of their stories mean that Taylor was told her only option to own her masters involved re-signing with Big Machine, and that Scott would own her future work in exchange for her getting the masters to her old stuff. Whether Taylor would get the masters to all 6 albums immediately or later isn't that important, and neither is the detail of the contract specifying 10 years rather than 6 albums, since it's likely she would have produced around that amount of albums in that time frame anyway. Another key detail is that Taylor was aware, and so were the general public, that Scott had plans to sell Big Machine. It had been widely reported for years at that point, and Taylor and Scott apparently had many private discussions about it. And Taylor says that it's another reason why she left Big Machine permanently, because if she signed a 10-year contract, she would then be stuck with whoever the new owners were for 10 years, and they would own her future work. Because of this, Taylor felt like it was impossible to sign back with Big Machine, and chose to leave, forfeiting the only opportunity she had to own her masters. Taylor said, "I walked away because I knew once I signed that contract, Scott Borchetta would sell the label, thereby selling me and my future. I had to make the excruciating choice to leave behind my past. Music I wrote on my bedroom floor, and videos I dreamed up and paid for from the money I earned playing in bars, then clubs, then arenas, then stadiums." Taylor ended up signing with Republic in a deal that has been considered one of the most artist-friendly contracts of all time. The contract stated that Taylor would own all of her master recordings for future albums, and in exchange, Republic would produce and profit primarily from her merchandise. Republic is also a major label, which is better equipped to handle a pop star like Taylor Swift compared to a smaller country label like Big Machine. In a series of text messages later leaked by Scott, Taylor tells him in November that she reached a deal with Republic. She says, "Scott, I hope this finds you well. Since communication ran dry on our negotiations, I've done what I told you I would do and gone out exploring other options. Owning my masters was very important to me, but I've since realized that there are things that mean even more to me in the bigger picture. I had a choice whether to bet on my past or to bet on the future, and I think knowing me, you can guess which one I chose. I also saw a rare opportunity to effect positive change for a lot of artists with the leverage I have right now. I know you believe in the same things I do, and I'd like to think you would be proud of what I've negotiated for in my deal. I wanted to tell you first that I'll be signing with Lucian. I honestly truly cherish everything you and I have built together, and I plan on saying so in my announcement of the new deal. What we accomplish together will be a lasting legacy and a case study on excellent partnerships, and may it continue. I still view you as a partner and friend, and I hope you feel the same. Sending you a hug and my most sincere gratitude and so much love." When the Republic deal was announced, Taylor and Scott seemed to part ways amicably and as friends, despite the obvious tension between them. Taylor posted thanks to Scott Borchetta for believing in me as a 14-year-old and for guiding me through over a decade of work that I will always be proud of. Scott responded quoting Taylor's song Long Live and said, "I had the time of my life fighting dragons with you." So things looked pretty peaceful and positive. But not for long. On June 29th, at 9:05 p.m. in a text later leaked by Scott himself, he texted Taylor and told her that Big Machine had been bought by Scooter Braun. The text reads, "Dear Taylor, hope all is well and congratulations on the success of your first 2 singles from Lover. I can't wait to hear the entire album. I wanted to pass along to you the same courtesy that you passed along to me in regard to my future. Tomorrow morning, Sunday, June 30th, at 10 a.m. Central, the Wall Street Journal will announce that I'm entering into a merger acquisition with Scooter Braun and Ithaca Holdings. This move will give us more pop culture superpower than ever before, and I'm so excited about the future. I want you to know that I will continue to be the proud custodian of your previous works and will continue to keep you and your team abreast of all future plans for releases of your work. Nothing but the best." The following morning, as Scott said, less than 1 month before Taylor's first post-Big Machine album released, it was publicly announced that Scott Borchetta had sold Big Machine, including Taylor's masters from her first 6 albums, to Ithaca Holdings, an investment company owned by Scooter Braun. The label was sold for around $300 million, which was paid out to shareholders. Because Taylor's dad, Scott Swift, had increased his investment in the company from 3% to 5% years earlier, he was paid around $15 million from the sale. Scott Borchetta made approximately $180 million, given that Billboard estimated his share in the company to be 60%. Scooter Braun reposted an Instagram story from one of his friends celebrating the sale with the caption, "When your friend buys Taylor Swift," before quickly deleting it. Taylor went on to like several posts on Tumblr about the misogyny of joking about buying a woman. Taylor responded to the sale the same day in a long Tumblr post, saying, "For years I asked, pleaded for a chance to own my work. Instead, I was given an opportunity to sign back up to Big Machine Records and earn one album back at a time. One for every new one I turned in. I walked away because I knew once I signed that contract, Scott Borchetta would sell the label, thereby selling me and my future. Some fun facts about today's news. I learned about Scooter Braun's purchase of my masters as it was announced to the world. All I could think was the incessant, manipulative bullying I've received at his hands for years. Now Scooter has stripped me of my life's work that I wasn't given an opportunity to buy. This is what happens when you sign a deal at 15 to someone for whom the term loyalty is clearly just a contractual concept. When I left my masters in Scott's hands, I made peace with the fact that eventually he would sell them. Never in my worst nightmares did I imagine the buyer would be Scooter. Anytime Scott Borchetta has heard the word Scooter Braun escape my lips, it was when I was either crying or trying not to. He knew what he was doing. They both did. Controlling a woman who didn't want to be associated with them. In perpetuity, that means forever. On the same day, Scott responded with a lengthy message on Big Machine's website, where he leaks all of the texts and paperwork from the negotiations with Taylor in 2018. The main two things that he disputes are that Taylor didn't know about the sale until it was public, and that she wasn't given the chance to buy her masters. He said, Taylor's dad, Scott Swift, was a shareholder in Big Machine Records. We first alerted all of the shareholders on Thursday, June 20th for an official shareholders call scheduled for Tuesday, June 25th. On the June 25th call, shareholders were made aware of the pending deal with Ithaca Holdings and had 3 days to go over all of the details of the proposed transaction. We then had a final call on Friday, June 28th, in which the transaction passed with a majority vote and 3 of the 5 shareholders voting yes. As you will read, 100% of all Taylor Swift assets were to be transferred to her immediately upon signing the new agreement. We were working together on a new type of deal for our new streaming world that was not necessarily tied to albums, but more of a length of time. Taylor had every chance in the world to own not just her master recordings, but every video, photograph, everything associated to her career. She chose to leave. Scooter's wife also publicly posted stating, "You were given the opportunity to buy your masters. You passed." Interesting that the man you're so grossed out by believed in you more than you believe in yourself. Your dad is a shareholder and was notified, and Borchetta personally told you before this came out. Taylor's team gave a responding quote to People magazine saying, "Scott Swift is not on the board of directors and has never been." On June 25th, there was a shareholder phone call that Scott Swift did not participate in, due to a very strict NDA that bound all shareholders and prohibited any discussion at all without risk of severe penalty. Her dad did not join that call because he did not want to be required to withhold any information from his own daughter. Taylor found out from the news articles when she woke up before seeing any text from Scott Borchetta, and he did not call her in advance. 1 month later, Taylor did an interview with CBS Sunday Morning, again repeating that she found out once it was in the headlines when the rest of the world did, and repeating her claim that no one in her inner circle knew.
You didn't see it coming?
No.
So how did you find out?
I found out when it was online, like when it hit the news.
Nobody in your inner circle
Nobody knew.
And you didn't smell it?
No. I knew he would sell my music. I knew he would do that. I couldn't believe who he sold it to, because we've had endless conversations about Scooter Braun, and he has 300 million reasons to conveniently forget those conversations.
So there are a few disputed details between them. Firstly, when Taylor found out, whether Scott Swift knew, and whether Taylor had the opportunity to buy her masters, and what the conditions were. On the first point, I kind of believe both of them. Given that Scott sent a text 12 hours before the news was public, and that Taylor was in London and would have received the text around 3 a.m., I find it completely believable that she wouldn't have seen his text and would have found out online first. To be honest, I do think Taylor was unfair and misleading about how she described it. Saying in her initial message, "I learned about Scooter Braun's purchase of my masters, as it was announced to the world," heavily implied that no one notified her. And I also think it was unfair for her team to criticize Scott in People magazine by saying that he never made a phone call, when Taylor didn't make a phone call either to tell him that she wouldn't be signing with him again, as we know from Scott's leaked text from her. I know people might be mad at me for saying that, but I don't care. I'm being honest, and I think that was misleading and probably fueled by emotion since Taylor wrote it only hours after finding out. The second detail is whether Taylor's dad knew. I think it's pretty clear that he didn't. Given that Scott Borchetta was leaking private texts between him and Taylor, I think he happily would have leaked receipts that proved Taylor's dad was on the call if he had them, and it would have been easy to prove if it were true. Scott Borchetta also openly said that there were only 5 shareholders on the call, and Big Machine had more than 5. So someone didn't join, and I think it's reasonable to assume that that would be Scott Swift. Finally, and probably most importantly, the issue over whether Taylor had the chance to buy her masters, because their stories are completely different here. As I mentioned earlier, Scott Borchetta says that if Taylor signed for another 10 years, she would immediately gain ownership of her old masters, and her future albums over the next decade would be owned by Big Machine. Taylor says that the deal was that she would regain ownership of each old album, only once she wrote 6 more, and would gain ownership of each album back one at a time. I think it's fair to say that the narrative from Scooter's wife and Scott Borchetta that Taylor had the opportunity to buy her masters is untrue. It seems that Taylor was never given the opportunity to get her masters in exchange for money. The only way was to re-sign her contract and earn them back. As for whether Taylor would get ownership of them right away like Scott said, or when she submitted more albums like Taylor said, I think they were probably both true at one point. The negotiations to get Taylor to re-sign carried on throughout 2018, and Taylor says in her text to Scott that they reached a standstill, so I'm guessing both options were presented at some point. Either way, Taylor was essentially being forced to re-sign with Big Machine and be under the control of whoever the new owners would be. Otherwise, there would be no opportunity for her to ever own her masters. Another important detail is Scott mentioning in his text that he would be the custodian of Taylor's work, despite the Scooter deal, which to me implies that Scooter was buying Big Machine but not Taylor's work. But I don't know. If anyone watching is more familiar with contract law and can explain that, please comment down below. For the next few months, things remained somewhat quiet as Taylor promoted Lover. But things got crazy all over again in November 2019. In advance of Taylor's Artist of the Decade performance at the American Music Awards, she posted an update to the situation saying, "I've been planning to perform a medley of my hits throughout the decade on the show. Scott Borchetta and Scooter Braun have now said that I'm not allowed to perform my old songs on television because they claim that would be re-recording my music before I'm allowed to next year. Netflix has created a documentary about my life for the past few years. Scott and Scooter have declined the use of my older music or performance footage for this project, even though there is no mention of either of them or Big Machine Records anywhere in the film. Scott Borchetta told my team that they'll allow me to use my music only if I do these things. If I agree to not re-record copycat versions of my songs next year, and also told my team that I need to stop talking about him and Scooter Braun. The message being sent to me is very clear. Basically, be a good little girl and shut up, or you'll be punished." I think Taylor winning the PR battle over her masters happened around this time, because this seemed so controlling and egregious. The next day, Scott responded with the statement, "As Taylor Swift's partner for over a decade, we were shocked to see her Tumblr statements yesterday based on false information. At no point did we say Taylor could not perform on the AMAs or block her Netflix special. In fact, we do not have the right to keep her from performing live anywhere. Taylor, the narrative you have created does not exist. All we ask is to have a direct and honest conversation. When that happens, you will see there is nothing but respect, kindness, and support waiting for you on the other side. To date, not one of the invitations to speak with us and work through this has been accepted." Taylor's publicist Tree Payne tweeted in response, "The truth is, on October 28, 2019, at 5:17 p.m., the vice president of Big Machine sent Taylor Swift's team the following. Please be advised that Big Machine will not agree to issue licenses for existing recordings or waivers of its re-recording restrictions in connection with these 2 projects, the Netflix documentary and the Alibaba Double 11 event." Tree continues, to avoid an argument over rights. Taylor performed 3 songs off her new album Lover at the Double 11 event, as it was clear that Big Machine felt any televised performance of catalog songs violated her agreement. In addition, yesterday Scott Borchetta flatly denied the request for both American Music Awards and Netflix. Please notice in Big Machine's statement, they never actually deny either claim Taylor said last night in her post. Tree is right in saying that they don't refute Taylor's claim that they were controlling what songs she could perform. They just say that they weren't trying to stop her performing on the show. And they also seem to believe that a televised performance of Taylor's old music would count as a re-recording. Big Machine then posts an update about the American Music Awards, essentially confirming that they did originally have an issue with Taylor performing old songs and saying that they don't have an issue with live performances. but that they did have an issue with the recording of that performance being distributed, such as on YouTube or TV repeats. Scooter then posts a lengthy message on Instagram to Taylor saying, "Since your public statement last week, there have been numerous death threats directed at my family. While disappointed that you have remained silent after being notified by your attorney 4 days ago of these ongoing threats, I'm still hopeful we can fix this. Knowing what I know now, all I've wanted to do is rectify this situation. I'm open to all possibilities. My attempts and calls to have an open discussion with you over the last 6 months have all been rejected. While some of your team and many of our mutual friends have tried to get you on the table, all have had no luck. It almost feels as if you have no interest in ever resolving the conflict. As the world now knows, you can and should perform any song you would like at the AMAs. I have never and would never say otherwise. Moving forward, I would like to find a resolution. Many have told me that a meeting will never happen, as this is not about truth or resolution, but instead a narrative for you. I would like to note that I don't necessarily disagree with him that she should have said something to her fans to stop sending death threats, especially after she posted on Tumblr. Please let Scott Borchetta and Scooter Braun know how you feel about this, which could be interpreted as a call to action and her giving the green light to hateful messages. I know that's a trickier moral issue, the debate over whether artists have a responsibility to control their fans. I'm just making the point that even if we agree that Taylor was morally in the wrong for not telling her fans to stop, that doesn't mean that Taylor was morally in the wrong for expecting artists to be able to own the work they created, and expecting that it certainly shouldn't be sold behind their back. Taylor once again slammed Scooter in her Woman of the Decade speech in late 2019 and restated her intentions to proceed with re-recording her old work. Throughout summer 2020, there wasn't really any more public drama between Taylor and Scooter, although there was tension behind the scenes. We've since seen a series of leaked emails between Ithaca Holdings, Scooter's company, and Jay Shoddy's, a representative from Taylor's management. The emails go back and forth, but basically consist of Jay accusing Scooter of attempting to silence Taylor by pushing for an NDA to be signed. Scooter's team clarifies that the NDA only proposes that neither party can publicly talk about negotiations between them, but if Scooter or Taylor wanted to personally criticize one another publicly, they would be free to do so. Jay responds saying that it still feels like an attempt to muzzle Taylor, since if she was to criticize Scooter, it would be regarding the negotiations between them, and Scooter could argue that she's in breach of the NDA. After extensive back and forth, it's reported in October 2020 that Scooter has essentially given up on trying to work with Taylor, who refuses to communicate with him, and has begun looking at selling Big Machine and Taylor's masters again. The same month, it's reported that Scooter was offered $405 million by Shamrock Capital and that he subsequently gave Taylor one last chance to buy her masters from him at a $100 million discount, giving her a price of $305 million. Although this seems to be the first time Taylor was given the chance to buy her masters outright, in exchange for cash rather than signing a deal, she refused this offer due to not wanting to give money to Scooter, and Scooter's deal with Shamrock went ahead. However, the deal carves out that while Shamrock would now own Taylor's work, Scooter would continue receiving a percentage of the profits. Taylor emailed Shamrock and shared the email, which reads, "I was thrilled with the idea of working with people who value art and understand how much my life's work means to me. Regardless of the fact that it was the second time my masters have been sold without my knowledge, while I was actively trying to purchase them, your letter brought me a great deal of hope for my musical legacy and our possible future together. This is why I was so disappointed when I learned that under the terms of your acquisition, Scooter Braun and Ithaca Holdings would continue to receive many years of future financial reward from my music masters, music videos, and album artwork. It's a shame to know that I will now be unable to help grow the future of these past works, and it pains me very deeply to remain separated from the music I spent over a decade creating. But this is a sacrifice I will have to make in order to keep Scooter Braun out of my life." She also tells them that she will be re-recording her first 6 albums and that it will devalue her original masters, but that she considers it necessary to reclaim her work. In November 2020, Taylor begins the process of making the first re-recording, Fearless, which would be released the following year to great success. And since then, she's released 4 of the 6 re-recordings, which were all incredibly successful. In terms of the court of public opinion, Taylor definitely won the battle and succeeded in doing exactly what she claimed. I think if you're honest and you're not blinded by your personal feelings about the people involved, we can all admit that neither side's story completely adds up. There's a lot of details missing, and it seems like both sides are either being misleading or at least not telling the full story about what happened. I think one of the most obvious questions is Taylor's problem with Scooter Braun. He obviously oversaw the creation of the famous music video and was on FaceTime with Justin, but she seems far more angry with Scooter than almost anyone involved. If that's the only issue she had with him, it doesn't really explain why she says she cried to Scott Borchetta over Scooter numerous times, or why she said in her Tumblr message and in her Shamrock email that she was desperately trying to keep Scooter Braun out of her life. I think there's more to the story there, whether it's something between her and Scooter, or something he did that's known within the industry that made her dislike him. And if we had the answer to that, it would also explain why she told Shamrock that she's been trying to buy her masters and has been unable to, when we know for a fact that she was offered the chance to buy them outright from Scooter for $305 million, but completely refused to speak to Scooter or Ithaca Holdings. Obviously, part of it is that she doesn't want Scooter to profit more from her work, but he was going to profit anyway, so why not just buy them to stop another company owning her masters? Jay Shoddy's also said that part of the decision was the so-called gag order. I'm certainly no legal expert, but the NDA does look fairly standard, and it does make me think there's more to the story to explain why Taylor reacted so strongly to it. To be honest, I think both sides are being slightly deceitful. I definitely think Taylor was being misleading by saying that she found out about the sale to Scooter when it hit the news and admitting that Scott did text her, albeit last minute. Like I said, I believe her that that's how she found out, but in both her Tumblr post, and again in her CBS interview, she says she found out online and doesn't mention the text from Scott, which does imply that he never told her, and that's obviously not true. I also think Scott's side has been misleading, particularly by responding to Taylor saying they were restricting her from performing old songs by saying that they weren't restricting her from appearing on the show, which wasn't the accusation. I do think it's odd that Taylor seemed to frame Scooter as the main villain of the story, rather than Scott, who I think behaved far worse. She said she cried over Scooter to Scott and he sold her masters to him anyway. He leaked private texts she sent him, and he violated the trust of a relationship built up over 15 years. Maybe there's more to Taylor's dislike for Scooter that would explain this, but we don't know. What we do know is that at least in the eyes of the world, Taylor's winning. She framed it perfectly in It's Time to Go, with the lyrics, 15 years, 15 million tears, begging till my knees bled. I gave it my all. He gave me nothing at all, then wondered why I left. Now he sits on his throne in his palace of bones, praying to his greed. He's got my past frozen behind glass, but I've got me. And that is everything we know and that you need to know about this situation. Please subscribe and comment to support the channel if you're interested and let me know your thoughts.